would it be fair to say that if more than the natural world existed, that would point as evidence to the possibility that there is a God in a supernatural world?
Of course.
Okay, so I think this would be where I mentioned where I want to go to initially was, okay, well then if consciousness, no surprise that I'd bring up consciousness and the soul.
Mm-hmm.
So would you guys say then that consciousness is something physical?
I would say it seems to be. I would say I've never seen evidence that it's not, besides people being mystified by it. I think there's a lot of mystery surrounding consciousness. If you want to talk about the hard problem, I think it is mysterious that physical matter can create subjective experience. I think it is very intriguing. I think, and I don't know if these are things we'll ever have answers to. We may not even be equipped to answer these questions. But I've never seen any evidence of a consciousness existing apart from a brain. I've never seen any evidence to indicate.
Can I interject before you go further there?
Of course.
Why would consciousness need to exist apart from the brain in order for it to be immaterial?
Because the brain is material, and you're saying consciousness isn't.
Right, but there are what's called property dualists who think consciousness is not physical. They believe it's always connected to a brain. In other words, they don't believe it can be separated, but they would still hold to it being immaterial. So I guess, in other words, I would say that's an odd standard to have, to say that unless you can show, quote unquote, that's a whole different thing we can go into. If you can show consciousness separate from a brain, that would show it's immaterial. I don't think you have to, nor historically has that.
Are you not claiming it's separate from a brain? It's separate?
Separate? No, they're deeply integrated. I would say they're distinct. I would say consciousness is immaterial. The brain is material.
But consciousness can exist without a brain, right?
So I think it can, but that's irrelevant as to whether or not it's immaterial to begin with. I think the first question, in other words,
it's very relevant. If you're going to say relevant, if you're going to say it can exist separately, and it is immaterial,
what I'm saying is I don't need to make that claim. So again, if I could bring on an atheist that's a property dualist, they think that the brain produces consciousness, but consciousness is still immaterial. I'm thinking of people like Thomas Nagel, possibly John Searle. These are atheist philosophers of mind who specialize in this area. So in other words, they're not going to say it can exist separate from the brain, but they're still going to claim it's immaterial.
Okay.
So the first question would be, is it immaterial?
Me. I don't know. I don't identify as that, so I don't know. I'm not familiar with that.
Right. But I'm saying you don't need to, quote unquote, show it can be separate. All you need to do is show it's immaterial.
But you think thoughts don't come from the brain. Am I wrong?
I think they can be caused by the brain.
So what is the distinction there? They can be caused by the brain, but they're not from the brain.
Fire can cause smoke, but fire is not the same thing as smoke.
Well, sure. I'm just not sure that analogy works with this, but.
Well, if consciousness is
demonstrate like empirically how fire creates smoke.
Sure. Yeah, we can go there, but I can also demonstrate that if I do things to your brain, it can cause thoughts in your mind. Now, the question of here's where we can take it, given that you brought this up. How would someone demonstrate consciousness separate from a brain? How would you point to consciousness?
I don't know. This is not my problem.
Yeah.
Well,
this is not my claim.
Well, but you did say that, or it seemed that you were saying that you would have to show consciousness is separate from the brain.
I don't think you would have to. I think you should be able to.
Why?
Because that's the claim you're making.
No, I'm just saying it's immaterial.
And the brain is material.
Right.
Is material separate from immaterial?
They can be deeply integrated, like the mind.
They're not the same thing, though, are they? They're not the same thing.
They're not. Right. So Leibniz's law of identity, which I'm sure you've heard me talk about. This is one of the easiest ways, logically speaking, to know whether or not two things are the same thing. If some A and B are the same substance, they're going to share the same properties. So if I said Eric Hernandez and the guy who's hosting the show, well, I'm using two titles to refer to the same person, right? So in philosophy, identity means literally the same thing. So Eric Hernandez is the same thing is identical to, literally the same thing as the host on the show.
Uh-huh.
So if consciousness and the brain are the same thing, which I assume, let me not assume, would you guys say that the mind is the brain?
Well, here's how I view it, and you tell me where you think I'm off base. I want to preface this by saying I could be wrong about this. I am open to hearing about how I could be wrong about this. This is what I believe based on everything I've come to know. Okay. I believe the mind is an action of the brain in the same way that I believe running is an action of the legs, that punching is an action of the arm. I believe the mind is something the brain does. It's an action it creates. So if to say, is running the same thing as the legs? I don't know how accurate that is to say. It is a thing. Running is a thing legs can do.
Okay, so there has to be something that possesses the subjective experience, right? So thoughts have thinkers. If there's a thought, there's someone thinking that thought. You don't have thoughts floating around in the world by themselves. My thoughts, going back to what I was saying about identity, if we can show difference between two things and it shows they're not the same thing, if there's a difference in property characteristics, my thoughts can have the property of being true or false. If you're implying that the mind is just a function of the brain, functions aren't true or false. My toilet flushing is a function. My engine running is a function, but my toilet doesn't flush, true or false. My engine doesn't run, true or false. My thoughts, however, can be true or false. So even if we want to say that the mind is a function of the brain, one, that could still be immaterial, as some property dualists would hold to. And two, it would show that, no, it cannot be reducible to a function because functions aren't true or false, whereas my thoughts can be.
Thoughts can be true or false. That's correct. I mean, I suppose all you're really saying is that they're unique in that sense. I don't understand how that means that they are not functions. Like computer functions can also be true or false. And no one is arguing that computer functions don't come from a computer.
Well, it depends what you mean by computer function. If we're talking like just ones and zeros, a 1 and 0 isn't false. But the information behind the function, sure, that can be true or false. But
everything about a computer and what it outputs is based on logic and logic gates and true or false and binary.
Which has been designed by a mind with information behind it. But going back to the leg running, yes, I'm showing it's distinct. And what I'm saying is, if a function of the brain can't be true or false, but a thought can be true or false, then that alone, logically speaking, shows that that the mind cannot be reducible to a function of the brain.
A thought can be true or false. I can have the thought, it is raining outside, and it could be not raining outside. And because that can be true or false, you're saying that means that thought cannot be produced by my physical brain?
No, I'm saying they're not the same thing. So if you're saying that a brain function is the mind, I just gave you a logical, deductive reasoning as to why that's not the case.
I guess I do not understand why they have to be separate.
I didn't say that.
Well, but my analogy about the computer makes perfect sense. Like there are things that have functions that can be true or false. A computer has functions and they can be true or false. That doesn't mean that the functions are not coming from the computer itself.
But I think when you're saying computer function, you mean more than just a physical function. I think you're referring to that computer language where, like mathematical functions, I'm talking about a neurons firing. They don't fire true or false.
They can fire in a way that produce true or false beliefs.
Sure, right. And then you could be a property dualist and hold that consciousness is a material, that consciousness is produced by the brain, but that wouldn't show that consciousness is physical. What would you point to show or to back up your belief that the mind is material?
Well, to show that the mind is material, I would point to the fact that everything we know about altering the brain also alters the mind.
And do you think I would disagree with that?
No, because I've heard your analogy about the guitar player and I'm familiar with that. I think it's undeniable that where there is no brain, there is no mind. And you still have to show how a mind or consciousness could exist separately from a brain. I think you're stuck there. I mean, I think you have to demonstrate that if you're going to show that they're not the same thing.
So one, that just is question begging toward atheism, because that would automatically say that it's therefore not possible that God exists. And if you're going to be a quote unquote agnostic atheist, and I don't think you can go that
God at all. I'm not talking about the
well, God would be a disembodied mind. God would be a mind without a brain. By his very nature, right? He would be immaterial. So that automatically would presuppose atheism in the strong sense. Like you'd be forced to go there. But you're saying I have to demonstrate the mind or consciousness separate from the brain. One, I'm not making that claim. But I mean, I guess I would have to ask, and why would I have to do that? Wouldn't you have to demonstrate that I would need to demonstrate that? I don't see why I would have to demonstrate that.
You are making the claim
that consciousness is immaterial.
That there are two things. There's two types of things.
Yes.
Your view. There are material things. There are immaterial things.
Yep.
Okay. Can you demonstrate immaterial things exist?
What do you mean by demonstrate?
Can you show me in any meaningful way? In any way?
Yeah.
Okay.
I did. There are properties that the brain has that the mind doesn't have, so they can't be the same thing. And so
I don't think that's true at all. I think the properties of the mind are expressions of the properties of the brain. The mind is patterns of neurons firing.
Okay, how would you back that up?
Because when patterns of neurons fire in different ways, we can see different images on imaging technology. We can.
And how did they get? Go ahead.
No, what were you going to ask?
Well, I was going to say, how did we get the imaging technology? How did we know what image to put on the screen with certain brain functions?
The person would probably tell you, "I'm thinking of an apple."
Very good.
It's okay.
Well, do you know what that shows? That's another argument for consciousness being immaterial and distinct from the brain.
How so?
As you probably heard me say before, a neuroscientist can know more about my brain than I do, but can never know more about my mental life than I do, because consciousness possesses a property of what's called first-person private access. Only I have access to my thoughts, whereas any third party could have access to my brain. So you can open my skull and look at my brain, but you can't open my skull or brain and look at my thoughts, because they're not the same thing, nor are thoughts in the brain.
Do you think it's really impossible for us to ever reach a point, which I think we are getting closer to, where someone could read the brain, read the neurons firing, read the synapses firing, and understand what exactly your thoughts are? I mean, we are already at the point where people can put devices on to where they can think and things move. Yeah. They can think and arms and like bionic arms move.
And I'm curious what you think that implies, or why there'd be a problem from my view. But before I get your thoughts on that, let me go and answer the question. So do I think it'd ever be possible? Sure. But from what I've seen in the recent studies, we're far, far from that. But let's go back to what you said. How did we get the imaging? How did we know what image to put on the screen to correlate with certain brain patterns? You just said it. You said by asking the person what they were thinking. Right. That's because consciousness is not physical. If it were merely physical, you could just look at the brain and see it, but you can't. So what you have to do is, given that consciousness,
look at the brain and see what, an apple?
Well, that's my point. You don't look at a brain and see thoughts. So think of it this way. Let me give an analogy here. So do either one of you play the piano?
No, not really.
Okay. So I don't really either. I mean, I've dabbled a little bit. My father was a really good musician. He could play pretty much any instrument he picks up. Well, he bought us a piano one time to kind of learn how to play, but they didn't have the keys on there. So what he had to do was press certain keys, listen, and he had a really good ear. He would listen for the note and then write down what keys were correlated with what notes. Now, suppose he did that, and he did it with the whole piano, all the keys on the piano. That proves, therefore, what? What would that prove?
He's pretty talented.
I agree. But does it say anything about the nature of music or notes? I don't think so. I just think it shows the correlation between the sound and the keys that you press. In the same way, sure, we could map the brain till we're blue in the face. None of that would show that consciousness is physical. All you're doing is pointing to the cause causation or correlation between the mind and brain, but no dualist denies that's not an argument against dualism.
Well, I'm not a dualist. I don't support.
My point is what you're saying doesn't go against my view.
Well, here's a point you brought up in your book that I emailed you about, and you actually didn't respond to my email about this.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. Well, you told me to read. You told me to read your book.
I must have missed that then.
Reply to you about it, and I did. It's okay. I didn't. No hard feelings.
Next time.
You made the argument that you can't look inside of a brain and see a picture of a rose, a full football field. So that means these things cannot be contained within the brain. I think that's it almost seems like a purposeful misunderstanding, because when you look inside of a hard drive, let's say the hard drive contains the game Red Dead Redemption, you are not going to see a horse, you are not going to see a gun, you're not going to see a desert landscape. Yet undeniably, all of those things are contained within the hard drive, right? In the one,
I don't know what you mean by contain, because using a similar analogy with the CD, a CD has grooves in it. A CD does not literally contain music. It has grooves, and when you put it in the right retrieval system, those grooves will stimulate certain sounds coming from the CD player. So yes. It's not quote unquote contained in that sense, because we're talking software hardware view, right? This is another view within philosophy of mind. So if you want to say that the brain is like the hardware and the mind is the software, that's fine, but that's another property dualist view, where people who hold to the mind being immaterial would make that argument. So far, everything you've said is actually in line with dualism, whether you hold to dualism or not.
Mm-hmm. I think in the same way you are saying, because we cannot look inside of a brain and map the synapses and see exactly where the rose is yet anyway. I mean, we can't see an image of a rose. We don't know without that person telling us it's a rose. That person telling us they're thinking of a rose is analogous to a screen displaying the game Red Dead Redemption. It's telling us what the hard drive is saying. We can also look at the hard drive with a microscope if we wanted to and map out all the bits and see.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the analogy. Again, it's a common software hardware analogy. But again, even the people who make that argument would say that consciousness is not physical, that there are two distinct things at play: hardware and quote unquote software being the immaterial stuff. So, right, you're not going to look at the hardware of a game, the disk, and find the game, because you need that retrieval system.
Software,
the information is the information of the software. Absolutely.
No, it isn't.
Information is not a material.
No, it's information is stored on a hard drive in ones and zeros.
So you said you. So I know I've sent you parts of my book. Is the information physical that's inside my book?
Yes.
How so?
What are we talking about, the video game analogy or in our brains?
I'm talking about my book, because you brought up my book. So I have information in my book.
Your book physical?
Yeah.
Yes, it's printed on pages.
I didn't ask if it was printed. I asked, is the information physical?
The information in it physical.
Where else would it exist? It exists on the pages printed. It doesn't get translated into thoughts and ideas until we read it with our minds.
Right. So there's markings on a page.
Yes.
That we look at and our minds interpret that and get the information.
Mm-hmm.
So we can use all kinds of analogies. My point is, whether you want to talk about a computer, a book, a CD, or neurons firing in the mind, I think the point's been made, in my opinion, that you're not going to reduce it to something physical.
Are you
even if you want to say the medium comes through something physical? There's markings on a page with ink, sure, but the markings on the page with ink in and of itself is not information. It's what we look at, and then we read and interpret the information based on the system we created for language, for reading and writing. So
it seems like you're almost arguing that this information floats around outside of us in the ether somewhere.
No, it's in a mind.
Okay, and minds float around in the ether.
Nope, they're in souls.
And souls are separate from bodies, correct?
I didn't say not while embodied. So you keep going to separate. My argument is that they're distinct. So I am not reducible or identical to my body. And I think that's another way to show that
I think this
naturalism is false.
semantics. I think this is becoming a semantics.
Mm-mm.
It's
No,
nothing but
let me ask you this: Are angles and sides the same thing?
Angles of a triangle.
Take a triangle. Are the three sides of a triangle the same thing, literally the same thing as the 3 points of a triangle?
They're not.
Right, but you can't separate them either, right? So they coexist necessarily if you have a triangle. So I'm saying the points and sides are not the same thing. You're saying, but they can't be separate. I'm saying, right, sure, but that doesn't mean they're not the same thing. So it's not semantics to say I'm not arguing for separation. I'm just saying they're distinct, just like the sides and the points of a triangle are distinct. So too, the mind and brain are distinct. Whether they can be separated or not is an entirely different question. But I don't have to show separation to show distinction. It's not semantics.
I'm trying to understand the nuance of what you're saying. I think to go back to your original point, there are material things, there are immaterial things. Right? Mm-hmm. The only thing I see that you've said so far to support the notion that there are immaterial things is that you don't understand where information is stored.
No, I know where information is stored. It's in a mind.
It's in a brain. It's in a physical brain, right?
How? No. Okay,
so it's somewhere. It's not in the brain. It's somewhere else.
In the mind. Right. It's in the mind.
It's separate from the brain.
Don't say separate. He doesn't like that word.
But right. It's the same thing, Eric.
So no, I just showed you.
Switch topics. We've been going in circles for a minute now.
Yeah, we can do that. But I just pointed out how the sides of a triangle and the points of a triangle are distinct yet not separate.
We're not talking about geometry, though. This is not.
You're missing the point. Is that there can be distinction without separation, and at this point, I'm only arguing distinction. So what I would say here, I'll give you this, and then we can change topics. So I think much like a CD or whatever other analogy you want to use, there are grooves within my brain that, while I'm embodied, yes, is going to affect my soul. Because speaking of we're already in dabbling in the area of neuroscience. So one of the world's leading neuroscientists on OCD and neuroplasticity, cognitive behavior therapy, Jeffrey Schwartz. He's used to be a Buddhist, now a Christian. He's also a substance dualist. And he has shown that changing the way you think can actually change the chemistry of your brain. So it's not just the brain affecting our minds. Our minds can actually affect the brain and rewire it by changing the way we think. So it's a two-way street, which would require free will. And free will is a whole other subject and topic we can go into if you care to, that I think would show naturalism is false.
It sounds like you just said the brain can change itself.
No, I said the mind can change the brain. I don't believe the mind is the brain. You do.
You believe.
Just say gotcha and go to the next topic.
You believe the brain. You believe the mind is not the brain, but you do not want to say it's separate from it.
I'm not making the claim it's separate.
Can you separate a mind from brain? Can you do that? Is that a thing that can happen?
I think so. Yeah, I think on the Christian worldview.
God, Eric, what are you talking about, dude? You just said you can separate them, but they're not separate.
But so let's take one thing at a time. My argument is that they're distinct.
Jesus,
right? Christ. My argument is that they're distinct. I'm not making an argument of separation because, again, let me reiterate, you have property dualists who do not believe they can be separate and yet believe the mind's immaterial. For some reason, you have this assumption that in order to show the mind's immaterial, you have to show it's separate. But first, I don't even know how you would point to a mind. How would I show you that there's a mind without a brain? Show me a mind to begin with. Can you show me a mind? Because I don't think you can.
Minds are concepts.
My mind has concepts. How can a concept have a concept?
The very idea that you have a mind is a concept we created to explain the neurons firing in our brain.
Where do concepts exist?
In our brain, within synapses that fire in certain orders.
So my concept is reducible to synapses firing.
That is correct.
Yeah. Nailed it.
How would you show that?
Brain scans. We can run back through the whole thing.
I'm not asking about brains. I'm asking about minds.
You're not having any concepts.
Let's say that's the case. Again,
I can show
you a triangle with points and sides, but showing me points and sides doesn't prove that the sides and points are the same thing. You cannot. Brain scans show you brains, not minds. I'm asking, how would you show a mind? I'm not asking about brains. Show me a mind.
You aren't having thoughts without those synapses firing.
That's not what I asked. I said, show me a mind. Just like you don't have a triangle without the points or without the sides. Show me a mind.
A mind may as well be a colloquialism for what we term the brain activity. Minds are brain activity. That's what it is.
That's an assertion. I'd like to see evidence for that.
Yeah, there's next topic.
All you're doing is showing correlation, which no dualist would deny. Property dualists affirm that. I don't know anyone that denies that if there's a soul or the mind's a material, there shouldn't be brain function or brain action. Again, one of the world's leading neuroscientists in the world is a dualist.
I'm sure there's a leading neuroscientist who thinks something else. I mean,
and I can show you two
there's a leading archaeologist who believes aliens built the pyramids.
Sure. My point is, talking about the brains of the neuroscience isn't going to show one way or the other. Any view on philosophy of mind is what's called empirically equivalent. There's no scientific empirical data that you can point to that's going to lend credibility to one view over the other.
It seems like your point is you don't have to demonstrate anything.
I did demonstrate something that are distinct.
I don't think you demonstrated that at all.
Yeah, you just stated it.
You
just aren't settled topics.
So, but again, functions are not true or false. We agreed on that. My thoughts can be true or false. Therefore, thoughts cannot be reducible to functions.
I don't think we did agree on that. We talked about the computer analogy. We talked about how certain orders of synapses firing can lead to true or false beliefs. We talked about
yes, but you're doing it again. You're talking about beliefs, which is a mind. You're talking about a brain, which is something physical. We know we all agree the brain's physical. We're disagreeing about the mind being physical. You keep saying a brain produces a mind or something of the mind.
Correct.
We're asking about the mind, whether or not that's physical or immaterial. My thoughts can be true or false. Brain firings aren't. My brain can have weight. My thoughts don't have weight. My brain can have a neurological pattern of firing that is 3 inches long. My thought or sensation of a smell of a rose is not 3 inches long. The taste of a banana is not 3 inches long. My mind is something privately accessible to me. My brain is not. I mean, we can go through a whole list of things, but I'm going to throw it to Tom because I know he's been wanting to change the subject. See where Tom wants to take this, or where do you want to go from here?